Today I'm going to be fixing the brakes on my Burchda R5 Pro. So the Burchda R5 Pro has hydraulic brakes. So they are Smayers. I don't know what that company is. All the reviews I can find of them are based out of the Philippines. So everything I know about how to work on these is actually from videos in the Philippines. Of course, they're not in English, so I don't entirely know what they're saying, but I got the gist of how to work on these from there. It seems like most hydraulic brake systems on these bikes are fairly similar though. So I don't think I'm going to run into too many issues. So let me show you what the problem is. The first problem I have is on this side, this is the front brake. You can see that the brake is grabbing nicely where it should. And when you're riding, it works exactly like it should. So there really isn't any problem with that side. On this side, you can see on my rear brakes, the lever goes basically all the way to the handlebars. It starts engaging maybe about there, and that's very little room to actually grab the brakes. It does work, and you can tell the brakes are working somewhat, but not well enough to lock up the rear tire unless it's super wet out. But the problem is things have gotten kind of wet this August, and the bike has been like this for a couple of months now. And earlier in the summer when everything was dry, I was just relying pretty much on the front brakes. Now that things are getting wet, I don't really want to risk locking up with the front brake quite as much. So I'm relying more on the rear brakes, and they're almost not doing anything. So I really need to fix this problem. So back here you can see this is the brake caliper, and these are the brake pads kind of tucked away in there. At first I thought my problem was actually the brake pads were worn out, and I don't think that's the problem anymore. I'll be taking the brake pads out today anyways, so we'll see. But I'm fairly sure that my problem is elsewhere. I do use the brakes a lot because I ride up and down steep hills every day, and so I imagine my brakes are getting quite a bit of wear, but I generally rely more on the front brakes, so I would expect those to wear out first. Whatever the case, I'll be pulling those out today and seeing how they are. I suspect what my problem actually is though, is I had my bike upside down because I was incidentally adjusting the brakes because they were rubbing a little bit when the wheels were turning. And I was trying to take pressure off the wheels, and so the brake discs wouldn't be tilted one way or the other just a little bit like they are when they're resting on the wheels. I thought I might be able to get a little bit better alignment on it. It seemed to work pretty well. Unfortunately, what likely happened is I got air in my brake line, and if you have air in the brake line, the brakes will go a little bit soft. They'll do exactly what they're doing now. So I'm going to try bleeding the brakes and seeing if that will fix the problem. Also, this video is applicable if you are wanting to change the brake fluid on your bike. You're supposed to do that about once a year. I haven't owned this bike a year yet, so I don't really need to change the fluid. I mostly just need to get the air out of the brake lines. So to get air out of the brake lines, I need to suck brake fluid out of the brake reservoir down through the lines to the brake caliper. And to do that, you actually need some tools. So this is what I'm using. This is a kit from that manufacturer, however you want to say that. There are a bunch of these kits. This kit looks very similar to one that I saw in a video of someone bleeding the brakes on these same brake systems in the Philippines. And so I suspect this is probably the right kit. We have two syringes. The syringe has a tube. These are adapters, so you hook these up to the tube. One end goes onto the syringe basically, and the other one goes into the brake caliper. And so this is how you pull brake fluid through the brake lines. This particular kit comes with 2 bottles of mineral oil. This looks exactly like what's in the bike already, so it's probably the right stuff. Most hydraulic brakes use mineral oil of one sort or another, so the odds of this being correct are really high. And again, it looks exactly like what's in there. This is a cup. It's basically just used as a funnel almost. So what you do is you put this cup in the reservoir, you fill it up, and you suck the brake fluid through the brake lines and out of this cup into the brake fluid reservoir. It'll all make sense when I actually go to do it. And these go in place of the brake pads so that your brakes don't lock up. You don't have any damage to the pistons or anything while you're bleeding the brake lines. So we have a couple different sizes here. These are slightly different thicknesses. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but they are just slightly different. And in fact, this one you can see is definitely very different. Has a different shape and much shorter stem piece. So I don't know which one of these is going to work, but they all look vaguely similar to the brake pads that I have in there, so I'm sure something will work. So we also have this Allen wrench here, but it's not really an Allen wrench because it has this star head on the end. So this is how you open up the brake reservoir, and in theory there should be some port on the caliper that probably uses a similar type of screw. We have a wrench here which you can use to put these fittings in. I think that's what it's going to be used for. Again, I think this is another spacer for a different type of brake pad. I don't have that on my bike. I have some rubber bands. This kit is really nice. It comes with rubber gloves and also a spare syringe. So let's get started. The first thing I need to do is actually take the brake caliper off. My first step here is going to be removing the brake caliper from the bike. So it's only held in with 2 bolts. There's one here and then one here. So if I undo those, then the brake caliper should just pull right off. Incidentally, messing with these bolts is also how you adjust the brake calipers so they're not constantly rubbing on the disc. So you can see here, this is the brake caliper. Came off very easily. Looks like the brake pads are okay. One of them is definitely more worn than the other, but there's still enough on there that they should be stopping the bike just fine. So I need to pull this pin out here, and it looks like the brake pads and this spring here that keeps them separated, those should all just kind of pop right out. So here we have the brake pads and the spring mechanism that holds it in place. They look fine. I don't think there's really any reason to replace anything here. So I'm going to use one of these spacers to stuff it into the calipers here. Looks like the big one should fit, so we'll do that. So now we need to find the bolt that allows you to bleed the brake lines. So it's probably not these two here because those are holding together the housing, but there's the small one on the back here, and I suspect that is what we're looking for. So I'm going to pull that off with an Allen wrench. Okay, so this does look like the right port. I can see the mineral oil down inside. So now I just need to find a matching fitting that looks like this screw that will allow me to attach the syringe to the brake caliper. Looks like this one here will work. The threads look very similar, so let's try it. Yeah, it's threading in very nicely. Since these are plastic, I'm not going to use the wrench to really tighten them down too much. There's a rubber gasket in there that should keep any mineral oil from leaking out. So this side of the operation is ready to go. I'm not quite ready to start sucking the mineral oil out of the system yet though. I need to go up to the brake reservoir and get that sorted out first. So this is the brake reservoir here. You can see it has a little sight glass, so there is enough fluid in there. So I need to figure out which of these is the port. Just looking at it, I suspect these two are holding the cap on here, and this is the port. So I'm going to try this, and if it's not it, I can always screw it back in and go for a different one. So looking at this Allen wrench, actually the two different sides here are different sizes, so I can't get enough torque using this side. So I do have a set of, I think these are star heads of some sort, but I know I have one that'll fit in my toolkit, so I'm going to grab that. So it does look like that's probably the right screw. So let me grab the funnel thing and stick that in there. Well, I don't know if this is actually going to fit. This part down here doesn't actually, this part down here looks really thick, and I don't think this funnel is going to work without me standing here holding it. So I'm going to try to do this without using the funnel. It looks like there's plenty of fluid in the reservoir. So let's just start trying to draw some of that fluid through the lines. So all these bubbles were in the brake line, so that would be the problem. One thing I just realized is that these plastic adapters have a fitting for this cup. So this should screw on to the reservoir. So I'm going to do that really quick, add a little bit of mineral oil, and so that should keep air out of the lines while I'm using the syringe. So there are a couple of things I learned from this experiment. This kit does not come with the right adapter for my bike for this funnel. There's just no way any of them would work. I ended up actually adding a little bit of mineral oil, mostly by forcing this down onto the port. I pretty much just put this fitting in the hole and forced it down and held it manually and pumped the brakes until all the air was let out. So that was the first thing I did, and that actually seemed to work pretty well. I did end up spilling a small amount on the floor, but I quickly cleaned it up and it looks like I have a little more to go, but for the most part, that worked. Then to test it, I put the brake caliper back on the disc brakes, and I decided to see where the brake lever was. As it turns out, the brake lever, when I went to squeeze it, was still going pretty much all the way to the handlebars like it was before. But the fix turned out to be a lot simpler. It felt a lot better. It didn't feel squishy like it did before. So if you have a small Allen key that looks like this, this is one I have just in my tools. There is a small set screw you can see right there on the inside is the brake lever. And so if you turn that, you can adjust the position of this brake lever. I did that, and the brake lever now works properly. So you can squeeze it to there, feels really solid, and it looks like it's adjusted about the same as this brake lever here. If I squeeze this one, it also goes to relatively similar position. So I also looked at the set screw on this side, and it was definitely screwed in a lot further. So I don't know how that would have happened. So I've never had this Allen wrench out before, so I don't know how that screw got backed out, but somehow it did, and that was causing part of the problem. It didn't cause the squishy brake feeling. That was caused by air in the brake lines, which I did clear. So now I just need to put my caliper back on correctly, make sure that it's centered so it's not rubbing constantly, and I should be good to go. One thing that I have learned from previous experiments is that when you are attaching the calipers and adjusting them to make sure they're not rubbing, so the way to adjust them more easily, and I saw this in someone else's YouTube video, so the way you adjust it is if you press the brake lever down, the calipers will grab, and then all you have to do is tighten those bolts down there. I have found from my own experience that if you don't have a bike stand, like me, I don't have a bike stand, if you lean it up against something so that it's more or less vertical, then you won't get any kind of weirdness in the adjustment. So that's how I do it, and it seems to work pretty well. All right, so I have my Burchda R5 Pro. Everything's working. The brakes are working properly again. The mirrors are on, so that's really all the maintenance I needed to do with it this time. Probably in another 6 months I'll have to replace those brake pads, most likely on the front. You can tell those are definitely a lot more worn than the ones in the rear, which is the way it should be. But for now, everything's working as it should, and it'll get me to work and back safely.